Hey guys, Tommy Kerrigan with Tommy Untamed. We've got a great show coming up. Thank you for watching.
And you've been on here a zillion times before talking about, and we're specifically talking of all your books, Crooked Brooklyn, and you can find the links to all these in the description. But specific behind the murder curtain, but specifically Fallen Angel and book three, which in short is an amalgamation of all of the true stories from your career, kind of intertwined and finding the common thread of it being evil. The stories are real, and I mean, I guess we couldn't prove that the devil's real, but I mean, it's not fiction in that it's outright you made it up and it's dragons and whatever. It is a thread of your experiences, some of the crazier experiences, and then kind of putting a I don't know a motive force behind it that sort of animates it. But the stories are real; they're 100% real, and they're 100% up. And so, everybody, please go in the description. Please go grab a link to the book, and that's all
Oh,
I'm going to do. I'm going to hand it to you.
that's okay. I thank you very much, first of all, again for having me. And you hit it right on the head, Tom. Um, I started out writing the Fallen Angel series um, for basically because there was not a because book agents that I had used for my other 8 or 9 books told me that true crime true crime fans didn't want and don't want short stories, books of short stories. They like, long form, beginning, middle, end, and that kind of thing. Not that you wouldn't do that in a short story, but you know what I'm talking about. They wanted a full book. That's what the agents said that they have learned over the course of their careers in terms of trying to sell. Because I had and I still have a ton of stories about things that happened in my career and crimes that I investigated and crimes that I tried and defendants and and meeting crazy characters who were witnesses, etc. I thought that a book of short stories might be something that the public would like. So when I was shot down, they said to me, "Look, if you know how to tie them together and tie all the stories together, or can figure out a way of tying them together and kind of come up with a long form book, well, then you got something." Well, that's what I did because I had, and I know that I've mentioned this to you before, but I'm going to repeat it because it's important to me. Back when I began my second career in the DA's office, I had started out right out of law school in the DA's office in Brooklyn. And after about 7 years, 7.5, 8 years, I got another job at the police department, legal area in the police department. And then after that, I went into private practice. When I came back after 10 years, the DA had a case that was very important to him, was very important to Brooklyn because it was such a horrific crime. And it was this young woman who was part of the Jewish community in Brooklyn, the Hasidic community in Brooklyn, who used to walk across a bridge that connected Brooklyn to Manhattan called the Williamsburg Bridge every Sunday, and she would do it for exercise. And this one Sunday, when she did it, she was set upon by a guy who was a junkie, there's no doubt about it. And he wanted money from her, and she didn't carry any money. So he got angry, dragged her to a part of the bridge that nobody could see. Even if you were driving on the bridge, you couldn't find it. It was below the level of the roadway, and strangled her with her own scarf and killed her. Then he stripped her of her clothes, and came back later that night and burnt her body with gasoline. Now, to me, when I heard that story, I have to be very honest. The first thing I thought of was, was evil present that day, that Sunday morning in Brooklyn to have this guy, to instigate this guy's crime. And when I summed up in front of the jury, I said to them that it's as if the devil himself had come to Brooklyn and committed this and instigated this particular crime. That's how horrible it was. There was the only thing left of her, Tom, was a little bra clasp from the bra that she was wearing, and one shoe. When he took all her clothes off, um, and burnt them. For some reason, one of the shoes got kicked away, and it was there, and it was recovered by the police. And and when I summed up, what I did was I put the shoe and the bra clasp on the jury rail and said, "This is what we all we have left of her." And it was a very impactful summation, and that was a very dramatic part of the trial. So when they told me, when the book agents mentioned to me about tying all of these things together, I thought back to my line the line that I used in that summation about the devil coming to Brooklyn. Now because you've read one and two, and maybe you've even read three. I'm not sure, but you know that the crimes that I have described in those three books are horrific. I mean, just horrific. And they fit the mold of somebody or something or some form or some force coming to Brooklyn and instigating these particular crimes. So that's what I did. I put together, and I put together a proposal, and I sent it to a publisher who had not published any of my works before, but who I knew because she out here on Long Island. I live in Queens, New York, but on Long Island is further east. She has a TV show, a local cable TV show. Actually, she has two. And when I did Homicide is My Business, when I did Behind the Murder Curtain, when I did Friends of the Family and Crooked Brooklyn, she had me on her show to talk about the books. So I knew her, and I had gotten to be semi-friendly with her because of all of the time that I spent with her for those books. And I sent her a note and asked her if she would listen to me and meet me and talk to me about a proposal that I had. So she called me and I told her what the proposal was, and she said, "That sounds interesting. Send me the proposal." And I did. And I would say it was not long after, maybe a day or two later, when she called me back and she said, "Mike, we all love this," and we meaning the people, her editors and people at her publishing company. And but we want you to do three books, not one book, because it's the kind of story that can get spread out over multiple volumes. And that's what got me started on this thing. And the very first case that I used to set up the whole scenario of the devil in Brooklyn, and the response by the Vatican and the authorities in the United States in terms of law enforcement authorities, was a case that I actually will never forget. And the murder was of a young woman, not as young as the woman who was walking across the bridge, but she was a social worker. She had come from St. Louis, New York, to get her master's degree at either NYU or Columbia. I just don't remember. And she was working in the Bronx in a shelter for battered women. And she would ride home on the subway every night from the Bronx to her home in Brooklyn on a street named Park Place. And it was a street that was around the corner from where I grew up. I used to play ball on that street, stickball and football, and I knew people who lived there. And when she was murdered and found stabbed to death, it struck me to the point that I went to the DA. I was not in charge of homicide at that time. I had moved up to become in charge of all the trials in the office. And I said to him, "Look, when we solve that case, when the police arrest this woman, I want the case." And he said, "Why? You got plenty of other things to do." And I told him, it's important to me. It's where I lived, where I grew up, and it's something that I need to do. A year later, Tom, a year later, they made the arrest. And I had another assistant DA go with me to the precinct to take a statement from the killer who was confessing. And I listened to it, and that case became the first case that I wrote about in Fallen Angel Book One. And it turns out that the protagonist, whose name is Michael Gioca, who is in the book is the chief of the rackets division in the Brooklyn DA's office, tries the case for the same reason that I tried it, and he gets gets a conviction, and he learns that there were people who were watching the trial, people from the Department of Justice and some people from the Vatican's Office of Exorcisms watching the trial to see what he could do, what was his talent, what he if he had the guts, if he had the ability to now become the person who was going to be in the forefront of battling this evil force in the event new crimes were committed in Brooklyn. And he was surprised. And he had they and in the book, in book one, the devil rears his head even before the Michael Gioca character finds out about him, because after he's Gioca was also a professor in law school, adjunct professor, as I was. And one night the professor was leaving Brooklyn Law School, and he's approached by the dean of the law school, who tells him that she's ill and she's going to die, and she wants him to take over and become the dean of the law school. And he's flattered, thrilled, and of course he would. He has no idea about anything that's about to happen to him with regard to this, this war that he's about to get involved in. And later that same night, he meets a friend, a priest who he grew up with, who tells him that there's this group that has you in mind to become the leader of these cases when and if they happen. And he, of course, can't turn it down when he finds out that he's going to be battling the devil. I mean, it goes right to the heart of what kind of prosecutor he was. And he says, "Of course, I'll take it. I'll take the job. But I've got this other position that was just offered to me." And he calls the dean of the law school. It's late at night, and he wakes her up, and he says, "I'm sorry that you're not feeling well, and I'm sorry about you're not going to recover," whatever he says. And she thinks that he's absolutely out of his mind. She says, "What are you talking about?" She says, "I'm not sick. Nothing's going to happen to me. I never talked to you tonight to offer you a job." So as it turns out, what had happened is the devil was playing with him, enticing him to take this other job because he knew what was coming down the road. And that's where Michael versus the devil begins. And in book one, I use the story of the young girl walking the bridge. The devil gets into the mind of this junkie and essentially tells him that she's a Jew, and that it's Jews carry money, and she's got money on the bridge and you need it. So I used a lot of all of the whatever, not stereotypes, but whatever people in terms of who they are or what they are. I use the stereotype, and I was not ashamed to do it because it was all coming from this evil force who was using what he could to drive these bad guys to commit these crimes. So it kind of was natural, and I had done other books before. The one that I wrote all by myself was Homicide is My Business. Unfortunately, my partner who was writing with me, who wrote Crooked Brooklyn with me, and Behind the Murder Curtain, was very ill, and he was not up to working with to writing, and so I did.
What is his last? I always forget. Is it Schmetterer? Well,
Jerry Schmetterer.
Schmetterer. Okay, I was trying to think of it earlier. I was like, I know he's knowing the name. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. Jerry and I became very good friends. Jerry was the spokesperson for the press person for the DA, while I was in charge of rackets, and he got to us right after 9/11. And so he and I and the rackets division at that time was the newsmaker bureau or division for the DA's office. We were the ones who made the big arrest. We were the ones who made the important arrests, and there were news press conferences that that Jerry would set up so that we could publicize these arrests and convictions, etc. And that's how I got to know him. And right at that time is when we started, when I started this, what I call my corruption investigation, in which 6, maybe even 7 years of investigation, trials of public officials began. Started with one judge who who tried to get money out of a lawyer for a case that he was doing and wouldn't sign the settlement until the lawyer paid him money. That led us to a second judge who was taking money to fix divorce cases and child custody cases. That led us to the person who was the kingmaker in Brooklyn, the guy who made the judges, the guy who said, "Yeah, you're my choice. You're the Democrat choice, and you can't be elected in Brooklyn unless you're a Democrat." But here's what I want in order for me to give you my imprimatur. And he would say, I want money, I want you to work, I want you to employ, my companies, etc., to do your advertising, etc. So that led us to into four indictments of the head of the Brooklyn Democratic Party organization, which at that time was a very, very powerful nationwide organization, who was when he gave and that person when he gave his imprint and his okay to someone who came to him all the time looking to become mayor, governor, president, even this guy was the guy that they came to. And from there I went to another politician who was shaking down someone who wanted to build a housing project in her neighborhood, in her district, and she said to him, "I'll be happy to go to bat for you with the city, but here's what I want. I want you to build a house for me, and I don't want you to charge me any money. I want you to take out a fake mortgage so that and you pay it, and then one day you're going to forgive the mortgage, and I'm going to get the house." So he said to me at the end of, and then of course there were the others. There was the mafia cops who I was doing at that same time. There was I did an investigation and indicted a former FBI agent for 4 murders. And to top it off, there was a there was a dental surgeon who lost his license because he was a junkie and began to open up, and he opened up a business in which he cut deals with funeral directors all throughout the 5 boroughs to get access to bodies before they were either buried or cremated, so he could steal the bone and tissue out of the bodies. He knew how important those things were for operation. So
Hold on, just with everything you're kind of listing, how much, no right or wrong answer, how much is like an expected or allowable level of grift? I mean, obviously, the immediate answer is none. You're not supposed to do it. I get that. But when dealing with organizations and multiple organizations in New York, no less, I mean, are up there with like Tokyo and New Delhi in terms of population and money flowing in and out. Is it like you put out the biggest fires, human trafficking, selling heroin, and then smaller stuff? It's like speeding. We all speed. You get tagged when you're doing like 30 or 40 over. You got to be a real idiot. But are you going 5 over? Yeah. Should you? No. But you are, and everyone does. It doesn't make it right, but there is like an allowable flexibility to it. How much is there a level? Is the allowance simply based on you don't have the numbers to enforce and catch everything? Is there a certain level of like kind of like, yeah, of course people are they're lining their pockets. Is there an acceptable level, or is it all like, no, get them all?
well, before I started this, almost, as I said, 7 year investigation into all of this stuff, I would have said that well, I'm not sure that there's I'm not sure that I'm not sure that bad that the young that the kind of as you call it, not so terrible corruption isn't acceptable. Okay. But once I got involved in doing these investigations, I realized that there is no such thing. There is no such thing as, low level corruption.
Okay.
Corruption is corruption, and it, whatever form it takes and whatever level it is, it affects people. And I'll give you an example. The judge who was taking money to fix divorce cases. People will say, what's he taking money and taking gifts and taking, you know, whatever favors this lawyer was giving him. Said, so what? It's a divorce case. People are going to get divorced anyway. And that's not the case. You know why I can say that? Because the woman who came to us to start this who came to us and we started the investigation with, was in front of this particular judge, and he was going to pass on whether or not her three children were going to be given to her in terms of her custody or to her husband, who she had already divorced from. Now, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. And in the scheme of things, when you talk about someone taking millions of dollars to, for corruption, well, the comparison on the surface doesn't seem to be there. But think about what that woman's life would have become if this guy had done that.
You can't,
So,
yeah, the dollar amount might not reflect it, but it's like it's
correct,
a woman losing.
correct.
And it's also, I suppose, there's probably some logic to, how many cancer cells are allowable. And it's like, well, none, because even if there's a couple, it's going to grow. It's like,
Exactly.
well, there you go. Fair enough.
Exactly.
Fair enough.
Exactly. And with the politician, with this guy who was the head of the party, um, we indicted him for four separate acts of corruption. And they had to do with, as I said before, electing judges or putting judges on the stand. Now listen, here's another example. Let's assume for the moment that a great lawyer, terrific candidate for judge, wanted to become one in Brooklyn. And he or she went to this guy to be interviewed, and he said, well, look, this is what you have to do. And they said, no, I'm not going to do that. Don't tell me what I have to do, right? Now, perhaps now the substitute for that great potential, for that lawyer who has great potential, is some lowlife lawyer who comes in and says, I want to be a judge. And the guy says, okay, this is what you need to do. And he says, okay, no problem. I'll take care of it. I'll do whatever you want to do. Okay. So who's hurt? The public, of course, because instead of having somebody who's brilliant on the bench making decisions that change people's lives or affect people's lives, we have some moron on the bench only because he had money and he was willing to give money to the person who could put him on the bench. But, his decisions down the road for people who came before him may very well have been maybe horrific because he just doesn't know or have the brains or the sentiment or the emotion to or the ethics to do the right thing. So again, I remember having putting the two women candidates. There were two female candidates to become judges, who essentially said to this guy, I'm not going to do. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. One of them had been acting as a mediator, so she had experience in this field of deciding cases, and she was excellent at what she was doing. But she said to this guy, I'm not doing it. I'm just not going to do it. And he basically ruined her. He didn't give her the spot, or didn't put her up for election, which is tantamount to appointing the judge in Brooklyn. So who lost? The people of Brooklyn lost because some other person who was not as good as this one may have gotten that position. So, one of the things that the cops used to say to me about these corruption investigations, they used to say, Mike, there are grass eaters and there are meat eaters. There are little guys who are taking just a little bit of graft, and they call them the grass eaters. And then there are the ones who want, the checks, they want the cash, they want stuff done for them to do big things, to affect big things in either in the law or in business or whatever. And those are the meat eaters. And I learned that the grass eaters could affect someone's life sometimes even more so than the meat eaters. So corruption is corruption, and it doesn't belong anywhere in the law. It doesn't belong anywhere on the bench. Doesn't belong anywhere in politics. But I'm not naive enough or naive to think that it's not present in politics. It's there every day with, and I venture to say that every person who becomes a politician is corrupt in some shape, manner, or form during the course of their career. Everyone. Now they may be, as the cop said, a grass eater. You know, maybe they used the position like that. Like our mayor was charged with using his influence to upgrade from coach to first class on airline tickets. Is it corruption? Yeah, you can't use your office to do those kinds of things, but that's clearly an example of what, in my opinion, what a grass eater is. If the guy said, "Okay, you upgrade me, Mr. Airline, and then I will make sure that at Kennedy Airport,
you get preference, or you get a new hang or terminal, or
there's a preference." Yeah, that's a different situation. So
there's probably also some logic to, even if quietly everyone in the enforcement division agrees, like, hey, we're going to go after the meat eaters, that's not something you would want to broadcast, because it's good for people to. I'm sure that cops, there's probably some, unwritten code of like, yeah, we don't pull people over doing this, that, and the other thing. However, you don't tell people that. You want people to think that they go after every speeder, because that psychological impact is, no, they will pull me over. Even if the cops in their mind go, I'm not going to, I shouldn't know that. I should think if I'm going 5 over, I'm going to get whacked, because that itself creates a self-policing. So if the mayor does it, that's a big name. You do got to hit them, so everyone else goes, man, they got the mayor even just for upgrading a ticket, nothing else, like no other kickbacks. Oh, then they're absolutely going to bust me if they find out I'm doing, giving my niece a free library card. Like, oh, they go after all of it. Even if they don't, it's good for the people to think that. All right, I see it. All right.
Yeah, but the thing is, Tom, that there are so many there in the past and in the recent past. Um, there were so many examples of individuals using positions, maybe not necessarily their own, but family positions, to get money, to make money, to do whatever X, Y, and Z, and it no matter how exposed they have become, that doesn't seem to be a deterrent to people, because they were people who came after who would do it, and it doesn't. I just can't understand why someone or how someone takes a chance when they look at what we have done, what we did when I with locking up judges and locking up politicians, and that didn't stop anybody. It didn't change. Unfortunately, it didn't change, for instance, the way judges were picked in Brooklyn. We thought that once we exposed this to the public, that there would be an uprising and say, well, we're not going to stand for this anymore. Well, I can tell you, Tom, right now, the head of the party in Brooklyn still picks judges. Nothing has changed.
But devil's advocate, you don't know what it would look like had you guys not done that. Like, it might be that, no, it hasn't changed, but maybe if you go back in time and run this simulation again and you don't do that, it might be 10 times worse now. Now, that's not like an acceptable or a satisfying answer, but it might be, it's like the war on terror. We went to Afghanistan. We all go, what was that for? What was Vietnam for? And I don't necessarily believe this, but just as a mental exercise, maybe you go back in time and we don't go to Vietnam, we don't go to Korea. Who knows? Maybe communism really does take over the world, and we go, oh. And I'm not. And again, now that's a very seductive, and it's also, it's kind of a bullshit argument because I'm proving something that I'm arguing something that can't be proven. So that this is a very good defense if I'm like a defense contractor. I'm like, it might be worse. So, but who knows? Maybe they'd be even more brazen. I don't know. That might just be me, pleading with
I,
myself. But
I can't disagree with you because there has to be that. Yeah, I
you
agree.
know, we have no
You
idea.
know,
We have no
yeah.
idea.
But in the it's hard now for me to believe that it could have been any worse
Yeah.
than what it was. Than what it was. Here's a
Fair
guy.
enough. Fair
Here's a
enough.
guy
Fair enough.
who says blatantly says to these two women who want to be judges, if you want to become this, you need me. And if you want me and to do for you to get you to the position you want to be, this is what you need to do for me.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't even
Yeah.
hiding it, Tom. It wasn't
Yeah.
even hiding it. During that investigation, I spoke to a guy who was a local politician, and actually, I'm sorry. I spoke to a guy who was who became an informant. He was a guy who was a local. I don't want to say politician, but he might have been as part of a political club, etc. And knew these knew people like that, and he knew they had the district leader of some section of Brooklyn in the Democrat Party. Right? He had got himself jammed up in another part of the office. He was jammed up in the sex crimes bureau, domestic violence bureau, I should say. And he looked, he said, listen, I have something to offer you guys. He's looking to save his own ass, right? So he talks to the domestic violence people and he says, listen, I got something that the rackets people might be interested in. So they send them up to me and I sit him down and he tells me that he was talking to this district leader who told him that a Supreme Court judge in Brooklyn, Supreme Court is the trial level judge in Brooklyn, um, admitted to him that he paid, I forgot how much, 100,000, something of that nature, to get the position, to get on the ballot to become a judge. That was, we had never, at that point in the investigation, we had never had anything as good as that. So what I needed to do, I couldn't do it through him because it was hearsay. He got it from somebody who heard it from the judge. I needed the person who the judge spoke to directly so that it would become an admission or a confession of some sort and I could use it in evidence, right? So I told him, listen, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to wire you. You're going to go talk to your friend your district leader, and you're going to have this conversation with him again. Bring it up. Somehow get to it. He said, that's no problem. I can do that. And we did it. We got it. So now the next step was for me to get the district leader in to talk to him, and he, it's funny because he was a guy who wrote kind of paperback novels, the district leader, in addition to whatever else he had, whatever other job he had. So I thought, maybe I could get this guy and maybe kind of touch on something that would interest him and kind of bring it back to what he does for a living in terms of writing. I figured out a way. I thought I had a way I could get this out of him. Well, you would have thought that I was trying to get the son of Sam to sit down with me and confess to killing all 6 or 8 or 10 people he killed. I couldn't get anything. I couldn't get anything to get to that particular judge, who, by the way, Tom, was the worst judge in Brooklyn. He was the worst. He knew nothing. He was on the bench for one reason. He had the money to pay the politician who said, okay, you're going to get on the ticket, and that was basically tantamount to appointment. He was awful. He didn't know anything. He barely must have got out of law school, probably like last in his class or something. That's how bad he was. He had a bad temperament. He didn't hide the fact that he didn't know what the hell he was doing. People used to, and when I got into doing this investigation about him, people used to tell me that guy is a dope, he's an idiot. I said, no kidding. I couldn't get to, this is how bad it was. This was at the kind of at the beginning. I couldn't get to the point where I could get the evidence to put this guy, to indict him and to put him, on trial. I couldn't get it because the the whole party thing, the whole Democrat situation in Brooklyn was like a closed club. Nobody wanted to talk. Nobody would talk. Nobody, because they were all protecting themselves. And it was a miracle. It was a miracle that we were able to get as far as we did in getting the judges locked up and getting the judges convicted and getting this Democrat politician locked up because we hit on the right notes. It was the woman who had been sitting in the courtroom watching this judge screw her essentially. And she said, my kids are going to get lost. I'm going to lose them. And she spoke to someone in the courtroom who was also a bad guy who said, don't worry, I can get to the judge. And if you pay me, I'll pay the judge and I'll get the judge to change his mind on your stuff. That's how this investigation began. And when I got her and I wired her up and sent her in to talk to this guy, this person she just met in the courtroom, she was pregnant. It was a dangerous location. We were really concerned about sending her in to talk, but she said, I'm going in. I'm not going to lose my kids. If this guy can help me, if you guys can help me, I'll do whatever you want. And she went in and had a conversation with this guy, and he said, this is what I need. And he showed her his cell phone with the judge's telephone number and his name in his contacts list. So we knew that we were on to something. And this is what really turned everything for us. When that woman left that night and she went away and she left the location and got to the cops who are detectives and we got her out of off the set, we stayed there and watched to see if this I'll call him he was an electronics salesman. He sold electronics, refurbished electronics. When he came out of his warehouse, there was somebody with him. And they hugged on the street. We had no idea who this guy was. Well, it turns out he was the lawyer that this electronic salesman was using to get to the judge. The lawyer had gotten to the judge and had been kind of grooming him, paying him money, sending him gifts, doing all over the course of his career in order to get the judge to fix cases on his behalf. And this guy, the electronic salesman, knew that because he had used them in a case of his own. So that is how we were able to start that investigation. And then we found out who the lawyer was. We found out, of course, we wired the location that the salesman was in. We wired the lawyer's office. But my point of this is, it was not anyone in the inner sanctum, the political inner sanctum of Brooklyn who helped us get to this point. It was a corrupt lawyer who I scared the shit out of when I called him in and sat him down and said, listen, I know exactly what you're doing. And he said to me, come on, I don't believe you. I said, really? We were watching him because we bugged the judge's chambers, we bugged with a wire, we did everything. And he reached into a little candy jar, a candy dish that the judge had on his desk and knocked it over and broke it. So when he doubted that I knew what he was doing, I said to him, did you ever
Did you replace the
candy dish? Tom, his jaw dropped. I said, I know everything that you have done. So he said to me, okay, I'll help you. He knew because we had him. And all he wanted from me was a promise that we wouldn't tell his wife that he was having an affair with his secretary in the office. And we knew that because we had tapped his phone, we had done everything that we needed to do. So my point is that I couldn't depend on the insiders, the insiders in the party, the insiders in that community to help me because they wouldn't. In fact, when I found the first judge, we did an investigation and we looked for all the lawyers who had appeared before this guy because I couldn't believe that my lawyer, the guy that came to me, was the first one he was shaking down in order to sign, papers on their behalf. I interviewed, I can't tell you how many lawyers. None of them would talk to me. None of them.
Oh,
Because they were basically insiders. We
oh
had to
yeah.
scare the shit out of one of them in order to get it done.
Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food. 72 servings per pail, 25 years shelf life. I've had the owner Clayton on the show before. He's a God-fearing, America-loving patriot. Get one of these, get a couple of them, throw them in your basement. It's good to have it, not need it, than to need it and not have it. If you don't want to do that, you can get their seeds. You can plant your own garden, so you don't even have to keep buying them. You can just get the goods and start your own, or you can even get freeze-dried fruits and vegetables like bananas, apples, strawberries, and raspberries. They support the show. It's an honest product. It's a good safety measure to have, and they keep my show free for you. So I'd implore you guys to please go to heavensharvest.com, use the link in the description, promo code TPC. Axios Fitness Coaching is a premium resource for holistic strength and conditioning services. Axios is best known for the Training Club, capital T, capital C, an exclusive community that prioritizes accountability, technique, diet, and nutrition. Everything you need to do to take action against the decay of the modern world. Whether you're looking to improve your physique, build strength, or just take care of your health and fitness, Axios will provide you with a solution that is effective and simple to execute. All you need to do is complete the intake survey, and you can see if you're a good candidate for the training club or any other of the services. And it's going to sponsor the show. So, one company falls off, another one arises. So if you guys like the show, you want to work out, throw the show a couple shekels. Go take the survey. Thank you so much, guys.
Higher ultraviolet exposure is associated with lower mortality. The United Kingdom is a high latitude and low sunlight country. Researchers there collected data on over 360,000 participants in a study of UV exposure via solarium use. When compared with non-users, solarium users had 15% risk lowered of all-cause mortality, 23% lower risk of cardiovascular mortality, 14% lower risk of cancer mortality, and a 12% lower risk of non-cardiovascular, non-cancer mortality. In other words, all other causes. Quoting the researchers, our study adds to the growing evidence that the benefits of UV exposure outweigh the risks in low sunlight environments. A link to the original publication is available in the box below the video. Get some UV light this winter. Immerse yourself in the tranquility of the blue. Visit a Blue Room soon. www.blueroom.com.
The show I have at two. No. Yeah, two in an hour. Bing West, he's a pretty famous military author. I'm reading his book right now, and it's even about like the branch rivalries, Marines, Army, whatever, and then even outside of that, it's like military intelligence, DoD versus CIA.
Right.
Within it, even in like backwoods, not even back mountains, Kandahar, Afghanistan, where there's no electricity, no one's ever seen a television. Within like a base of 10 Marines, one of the CIA spooks uses his like CIA spook gear for the mission and finds out someone on the base has a cell phone, which is against regulations. And he starts threatening the guy. He starts threatening like the whoever, I don't know, the captain. And he's like, "You let me and my guys go out and use your resources, and I won't tell people back at Langley in the NSA that you're talking to your girlfriend." And he's like, "Well, you're not supposed to." He's like, "Well, maybe we both look the other way." And it's like 10 guys 100 zillion miles from here in the middle of no. It's still the same.
Yep.
They're just,
Yep.
It's just leverage.
No
It's
doubt.
points of leverage and points of weakness. I think that's funny. It's like, yeah, not just Brooklyn. It's like that's what I imagine is how most of the world works.
The wise guys that I talked to and have talked to always used to say to me that, we're not the worst. We're not the worst. The politicians are the worst because they hide it. People think that they're on a different level. They know that what we are, but they're worse than we are. And when I did the trial and they locked up this Democratic leader. And we convicted him after I convicted him after the first. I indicted him tried him 4 times, convicted him the first time, second time. He beat me the third time, and I convicted him the fourth time. After the first conviction, I forgot if it was a juror or somebody, maybe from the press. I don't remember. They said to me, "How is it that this is now first coming out? How is it that we didn't know anything about this stuff until now?" And I said, "Well, the bottom line is no one looked. No one wanted to look. These guys were not going to police themselves. They were writing laws and doing things that were going to help them. In fact, as it turns out, they had done some of the things that, or they had written laws or tried anyway, to write laws that were going to protect them from getting into the jackpot that they had been in when we started looking at them." It was unbelievable. No one looked. No one looked. That was what it was. I said to the guys that were with me on the investigation, "Are we, like explorers walking into, in the South Pole where no one has been here before?" And the answer is yes, we were. No one looked at this stuff. And when we started to look at it, Tom, I got to tell you, I'm sure that there was more that we couldn't even get to because there were people who wouldn't talk to us. I am sure that with the first one, if one of those lawyers had opened up and told me, that would have led to others opening up. And I would have had this one particular judge for numerous indictments as opposed to this one. And that's just the way it was. And your story about these people in wherever they were in the mountains of Asia, still corrupt, still making deals, still keep your mouth shut. I'll keep my mouth shut. That's exactly the way that I found, and it's almost sad to say, Tom. It's almost the way of the world at this point.
Yeah, and I do kind of, I think, by completely exaggerating it to the CIA Marine scenario, you do see, because it's kind of explained in the book, and it's like, we're not going to be here for 20 years, like at that specific base. Like, we're going to be there and then we're going to be gone. We're not going to be here long enough to like get to know everyone. We're not going to have years of experience. We might only be here for a couple of weeks, and it's like, well, this is the quickest way to get things done. Do we want to just sit around, or it's like, I need to go here. You don't want anyone to know that you have a cell phone. And then it's even like working with interpreters. It's like, yeah, none of them are loyal, but make sure you keep giving them cash and porn, and they won't give away your position to the Taliban because they want more cash and porn. And it's like, if it works that quickly, and if that method works either here or you can do it in the literal mountains of Afghanistan, I mean, like fire or a blade, some things are just universal. You pull out a knife and like everyone around the world knows it. Doesn't make it right, but in terms of applying pressure and getting something done quickly, I mean, and maybe it's maybe when you're in, the tip of the spear in, Afghanistan hunting the Taliban, maybe it's allowed a little more gray area. Maybe that logic shouldn't be applied, say, in New York, but if that's how the world works, it doesn't make it right. But if that's how the world works, it certainly doesn't make it new. If that makes sense.
And the other part about it is that you say or ask yourself, well, why did they do it? Well, the bottom line is they did it because A, selfish, B, they want money, and B, they could do it.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. They could do it, so why not do it? Look, one of the charges we had of this particular guy is he was a very, very powerful politician, ran on a regular basis for the assembly in New York, and he was the head of the party. And he used to run, he ran campaigns, obviously. He raised money for his campaigns. And he would tap donors for money. One of the charges was that he was taking the money that was earmarked for his campaign and basically stealing it. He was putting it in his pocket. And how did we catch him? One of the people who was supposed to be an ally, we got her. We caught her. she was also one of these corrupt people. And we said to her, we're going to put you on a stand because I know that you know what he did with that check and how it went into his pocket as opposed to, into the place where the donors thought it was going, into his campaign to help him. And we put her on the stand, and I had to threaten her with, so I'm going to ask you the questions. Ever hear of perjury? So you're going to get on the stand and you're going to, tell the story, tell what I asked you. Otherwise, there's going to be trouble for you. Well, as it turns out, later on, there was trouble for her. She was the assembly person who later on was putting the squeeze on this contractor who wanted the ability to build, a housing development in her district. And she's the one who said to him, yeah, I'll go to bat for you, but I want a house. I want it free. I want, that kind of thing. So, you're talking about birds of the feather. One hand washed the other, but the only way it worked, Tom, and was with the witnesses that we finally were able to get to come forward. You had to essentially scare the hell out of them. Listen, that's basically what it was like. So not all of them. There were a lot of them who were victims and who came forward and wanted to testify, like those judges, the judge candidates. And but there were a number of them who, if we didn't put pressure on them to, just give them tell them what the world was like, and not read the riot act and threaten them with something illegal. No, say, look, we know this. We know that you've been here. We know what you've done, and or you're part of this, or what he has done, and you're keeping it because I know why you're keeping it to yourself, because you don't want to get into trouble with him, which is going to cost you, maybe your job, maybe something else will happen, and you won't be protected by him. So that's the way of the world in terms of corruption. It's it's the one hand washes the other, and when you hit on it, there are people who don't want to give it up because they're afraid of what the ramifications are for them down the road, and that's a sad situation. And you've got to hopefully find people who have the guts to come forward and say, yeah, this is what happened, and I'm going to tell you about it. And I was fortunate in a lot of the other situations to have that happen. I was able to to get people to talk to me. So it was a really eye-opening time in my life. By that point I had been a prosecutor for probably 30 years, and here I was involved in a situation that not only was going to take my time, my effort. I was tired as hell after every day because it was so difficult, to do. But I also had to, quote unquote, live professionally in that world. I mean, I was indicting judges, and they were going to jail. There were lawyers who didn't want to have anything to do with me. There are, politicians who didn't want to have anything to do with me or anybody connected to me. And I'll never forget this. the DA's office always ran a big Christmas party every year, and we had it at the hotel where our office was in the ballroom. And I am at the Christmas party, and it was in the middle of a couple of the judges had already been locked up, and I'm there walking around. I went to get a drink, and this judge, who I knew very well, starts to walk towards me. So I figured, here we go. Know what he said to me? He whispers to me, leans down, and now I know why he whispered. He said, "Keep up the good work."
Yeah.
Keep up the good work. I said to myself, it made my night, made my year. When I was finished with this thing, I have told that story many times. I don't even think the judge remembers. In fact, I just sent him a little note, his anniversary, about how long he's been on the bench. But I knew the guy from when he was a law secretary for another judge that I was trying cases. So he knew me, and he knew that I wasn't some cowboy screwing around with things that weren't true. They were all true.
Well, that's someone who isn't dirty, and that's someone who's been suffering because they're not dirty, because they've upheld their morals, and be it a relationship with God or how they're raised or belief in karma. they keep doing the right thing, and then in their mind they're probably like, this is bullshit because everyone else is getting ahead and they're all slime balls. So
Yeah.
he's probably looking at this like, I can now. It's like, oh, like good is happening. You get rid of these fuckers. Now I can stand out, and guess what? And there's nothing to take me down because I've been doing it by the book, which is why I haven't been advancing. But I mean, that's got to be a positive reinforcement for you
No
because you
question.
go, okay, something's happening. I'm not just going in there guns blazing.
Absolutely. There's one other, and let me do this before we sign off. Tell you another short story. So I'm coming out of the courthouse that I had been, I was trying cases still at the time and going to the grand jury in the courthouse, etc. And I'm coming out in the middle of this whole investigation, and there's a court officer in uniform at a particular spot around the courthouse. He was, they had security outside the courthouse, and he was on security duty that day. And I didn't know him very well. I knew him by face. And he sees me, and he says, Mr. Vecchione. I said, so again, I rolled my eyes and said, oh, here we go. I'm going to get more shit, And he said to me, can I talk to you for a minute? I said, sure. He introduces himself, and he says to me, I got a story to tell you. He names a judge who was in the criminal part of the courthouse, right? There's the criminal term and the civil term. The civil term is the money term. People, sue people for money. Criminal term is obviously what it is. So this judge was in the criminal term. And this court officer worked for him, was in his courtroom when he was assigned to him when he was in the criminal term and handling criminal cases. He tells me one morning, before court started, the judge takes the bench and calls the staff, his staff, the court officers, the clerk, etc., to the bench. He has something to say to them. In open court, but there's no lawyers there, no spectators. And he says to them, I just got great news. I'm getting transferred to the civil term. And he says, now we can really make some money. That's how brazen and ballsy these guys were. Why? Because, as I said, no one was looking. And obviously people could get away with it. So can you imagine what this guy's courtroom must have been like in terms of, and what it would have been like with people trying to settle cases? You want it settled? Here's what it's going to cost you. Something to me. That's the first judge that that was the situation with the first judge we started with in this whole investigation. So the case was an infant was hurt when her mother got into a car accident. And the case was settled for millions of dollars. The infant was going to get several $1 million. In New York, in order for a kid in order for a lawyer to settle a case in which a child is the victim, to ensure that the parents don't steal the kid's money or that nobody steals the kid's money, there has to be something called an infant's compromise sign, in which there is a bank account set up, etc., all kinds of protections, right? If you don't get a judge to sign the infant's compromise, you can't settle the case. This particular judge had this multi-million-dollar case, and the lawyers settled it. And the judge calls one of the lawyers to his chambers and said, let's take a walk. Now, you've seen mob movies where they have these walk talks outside the street. They had a walk talk. And the judge said, how much you making on this? The guy told him, well, a third of, the multi-million-dollar thing. He said, well, I'm not going to sign the paperwork unless you give me $250,000. The lawyer was so taken aback that he told me, he said very candidly, he says, okay. He thought the judge may have been, he said, maybe, I thought about it later. Maybe the guy was kidding. Maybe I misheard him. So I prepared the papers. He signed them. The judge signed them. He said, and then that was in the summer. He said, the fall passed, Christmas came, the holidays came. I hadn't heard from the guy. The day after New Year's, the first day back, the judge calls him in his office and says, come see me. He goes into his chambers, And the judge says, I didn't forget. You still owe me this money. The lawyer was able to get him down to 115,000 as opposed to 250,000. And then he went to my ex-boss, who was a lawyer, who came to us, and that's how we started the investigation. So the whole idea of corruption, and it's not foreign to any part of society, in my opinion. Not popular, but the famous or infamous cases are generally, either police officers taking money or politicians taking money or, that kind of thing. But it's everywhere in politics, and it's everywhere in life, unfortunately. There's always a deal to be made, and people are always looking to make a deal. And it's really sad, Tom. It really is. So.
Yeah, I mean, to be so brazen to walk in and announce that, that's not stupidity. That's somebody who knows that they've all gotten away with it for so long.
Correct.
And that they all do it.
Right.
That it's not, that's just a normal way of talking. And the only thing that
fosters. Brazen. Absolutely.
And so for it to be that acceptable for so long means that just a sprawling ecosystem of corruption has been growing for that long. And then, what happens when you're just some poor person who's going in? You don't want to lose custody of your kids because your wife or your husband's crazy, and you're going in there, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, this is the graft, and then you start going like, oh, there is no like victimless thing here, like.
Yeah.
And and that's like, hey, and then if you have the ability to change it, that's on you. Like, you are now involved. And I mean, I suppose that does. Yeah. I mean, what happens when you don't have that money to pay and you're just trying to get your kids and you're a single mom or a single dad? And I mean, after this life, what happens when God looks at you and goes, dude, all you had to do was open like one investigation and that would have scared all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was with the detectives when we arrested that first judge. We stopped him in his car. He was on his way to play tennis. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning. And we pulled him over. I get out of the car. The detectives get out of the car. And the judge opens the door of his car. And he goes, fellas, it's okay. It's okay. I'm a Supreme Court judge. That was the first thing he said. I'm a Supreme Court judge. As if we were then going to say, well, okay. Well, that's what he expected.
Well, that's what he'd been probably doing.
Right. And we put him into the back seat of one detective's car, and I sat next to him in the back seat. And the detective was driving, and we get maybe 8-10 blocks away from the spot where we were going to arrest him, on the way going to where we arrested him, on the way to go to downtown to the office. And I look over. It was silent. The guy was silent. And I figured, well, he knows the law. He's going to keep his mouth shut. I look over. He was asleep. He fell asleep in the back of the car after being arrested for whatever corruption it was that we were locking him up. And my friend George, who was the detective, said to me, well, now we know he's guilty, Mike, because the guilty ones sleep, and the others who know that they were wrongfully arrested are hyper
panicky. Yeah.
Exactly. So so that's that's but the idea that this guy announced, I'm a Supreme Court judge, and I said to the guys later on, I said, I guess he expected us to get back in our cars, let him go play his tennis because he was a Supreme Court judge, and what?
I'd say more than that's what he expected, but rather that's what he had probably done 100 times.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt.
Less expectation and more, it was just a learned pattern.
Look, you don't ask a lawyer for $250,000 to sign papers unless you've done it before, and unless you've been successful.
You don't start with two. The first time you do, you ask for $50.
Correct. So
yeah. No, that was my first thought when you said he was sleeping, because I know myself, and I would be having a panic attack because I know I didn't do anything.
Exactly.
So if the cops knocked on my door for my podcast, I'd freak out because I'd try to be explaining that like I haven't done anything.
No doubt. No doubt.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So for anybody who's listening or watching, Crooked Brooklyn is the book that has all of these stories in it. And you know, I don't think since the last time I spoke to you, Tom, I have the book has been optioned now. It looks like there are people who have been interested in it, and maybe it's going to become a TV series. So we'll see.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, hey, for now, let's wrap this up because I got to prep for the next one. But Mr.
Okay,
Michael Vecchione, thank you,
Thank
sir.
you again for having me. Happy Easter. Hopefully you have
You
a
as well.
great holiday.
You as well.
And we'll hopefully you'll have me back again.
Yes, sir. Yeah, shoot me a text. And for everybody listening, please go
I
in the
will.
description. Please
Let
go
me
grab
just
any of
add
those.
one last thing.
Yeah.
I'm back writing the Jimmy Dennedy story, the Hard
Beautiful.
Guys Pride story. So
Beautiful.
it's going to be. I'm very excited about it. I'm happy that I went back to doing it. I'll figure out a way to sell it once I write it.